Picture a flatbed truck pulling up to a driveway in Southern California sometime around 2020 or 2021. A woman in her late 70s is standing there watching a car get loaded onto that truck. She owns the car. She has owned it for 40 years. It is a white and gold 1979 Hurst Oldsmobile, and it is in beautiful shape because she never let it sit. She drove it. She cared for it. She kept it running the way she kept herself running, which is to say she never stopped. The buyer is a collector named Bruce Smith. She is selling it because she needs the money. The flatbed pulls away, and that car eventually ends up inside the main display room of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in Daytona Beach, behind glass, with a plaque telling every visitor exactly what it is and who it used to belong to. Here is the part almost nobody knows. The woman who just sold that car is also in the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. She was inducted in 2019. She is the only promotional figure in the entire history of that institution ever to receive that honor. So the car and the woman both ended up in the same building. One of them got there because somebody wrote a check. The other one got there because she earned it across 6 decades of work that this industry has spent 60 years celebrating without ever fully accounting for. That woman is Linda Vaughn. That 1979 Hurst Olds is what this video is going to follow. And the story of how she ended up needing to sell it is a story the motorsports industry has never properly told. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the economics behind the legends this sport created. If you're someone who loves motorsports history and wants to understand what actually happened to the people who built this industry from the ground up, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now, if you have spent any time on this channel, you already know who Linda Vaughn was at the racetrack. You know the bouffant. You know the gold sequins. You know the 9-foot golden shifter mounted on the back of that Hurst Olds parade car. You know the wave, the smile, the presence that could stop an entire pit lane cold. What you probably do not know, and what almost nobody in the sport has ever bothered to put down clearly on paper, is what the actual business deal was underneath all of that. Who paid her? How much? For how long? And what she walked away with at the end of it. That is what we are going to find out. Here is what most people don't realize when they think about Linda Vaughn. They think about the image, the sequins, the car, the crowd reaction. What they almost never think about is the contract. And the contract is the entire story. Because everything, and I mean everything, that happened to her financially across the next 6 decades flows directly from what she signed in 1966 and from what she did not negotiate into that agreement. So to understand where she ended up, we have to start at the beginning, which means we have to go back to the moment she walked into Hurst Campbell Incorporated for the first time. In 1966, George Hurst was running a privately controlled company out of Warminster, Pennsylvania, and the business was doing extraordinarily well. Hurst shifters were factory equipment on GTOs, Boss Mustangs, Plymouth Barracudas, Dodge Chargers, AMC SC Ramblers. The company had co-branding arrangements with every domestic manufacturer that mattered. According to automotive historian Aaron Severson, Hurst Campbell revenues were already past $20 million a year by the mid-1960s and still climbing. In 1968, the company would go public. By any honest measurement, Hurst was not some garage operation. It was one of the most successful performance parts businesses in the country. When Linda Vaughn answered the 1966 Hot Rod magazine ad for the second Miss Hurst Golden Shifter, she was not walking in the way the other 200 applicants walked in. She walked in with a marketing presentation she had prepared for the Hurst Board of Directors. She laid out specifically how she would increase product exposure. She outlined what she could measurably do for the brand. She was not auditioning. She was pitching. She got the job. And she got the contract that came with the job. That contract is the part of this story nobody has ever written down clearly, and it is the foundation that everything else here is built on top of. Here is what we know about it. She was hired as a salaried spokesperson. Across the next decade, she was paid as an employee, not as an owner. She did not hold stock. She did not hold options. She did not have a profit-sharing arrangement. She did not license her own name and likeness back to Hurst Campbell. The Miss Hurst Golden Shifter persona, the photographs, the publicity material, all of it was company property under the standard work-for-hire arrangements of the era. That is consistent with how every promotional figure in that industry was contracted at the time. It is also the single most consequential fact in her entire financial history. Here is what we do not know. And this is the part one want you to sit with for a second. Across 6 decades of trade press coverage, magazine profiles, autobiographies, Hall of Fame inductions, and roast tributes, no public source has ever disclosed a specific dollar figure for what Linda Vaughn was paid at Hurst. Not in 1968 when she was on the cover of Motor Trend. Not in 1972 when she made 172 personal appearances in a single calendar year. Not in 1983 when she was promoted to Vice President of Public Relations. A 10-page Sports Illustrated profile written by Bob Autumn in May of 1983, titled From a Vamp to a Veep, was specifically about her transition from spokesperson to executive. It runs at length about her contacts, her credibility, her value to the brand. It pointedly contains no salary figure. Think about what that silence means. A trade is being made in plain view of the entire industry across 2 decades. A $20 million a year company is using one woman as the single most recognizable face of its product line. She is generating measurable sales. She is training the Hurst staff. She is calling pro stock races. She is working trade shows and military tours and personal appearances. And the dollar figure attached to her end of that trade has never, in any source, in any decade, been spoken out loud. That silence is not an accident. That silence is part of the story. So let's keep moving, because what happens next is where the pattern starts to become visible. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. In 1970, something happens that should have told everyone watching exactly how this industry handled its most valuable people. Sunbeam Products, the appliance and consumer goods conglomerate, buys Bill Campbell's stake in Hurst Campbell. The deal comes with promises. George Hurst is going to get an executive role inside the new ownership structure. He is going to get a seat on the board. He is going to keep running the brand he built from nothing. Sunbeam reneges on every piece of it. Inside of about 3 years, George Hurst is squeezed out of his own company. By 1973, he is gone. The man who invented Linda Vaughn's job, the man who hired her, the man who personally championed her promotional program, is no longer at Hurst. And the brand culture is shifting under Sunbeam from hardcore performance parts toward consumer accessories, which is to say it is shifting away from the racetrack and toward the parts counter at the hardware store. Now think about what that signal would have meant to anyone paying attention in that moment. If Sunbeam was willing to break a handshake deal with George Hurst, who had built the company and held equity in it, what kind of deal were they ever going to write for a salaried spokesperson who held nothing? The answer is the deal she already had. The same deal, paid weekly, year after year, with no piece of the brand attached to it. And Linda kept working. Because what else do you do when you are a salaried employee of a company that has just changed ownership? You show up. You do the job. You make the appearances. You sell the product. That is exactly what she did. The decade rolled forward. In 1976, she stepped back from the formal Miss Hurst Golden Shifter title and moved into broader public relations and advertising work for the company. But she stayed inside the Hurst orbit and she stayed in front of the cameras at every race, every trade show, every event that mattered to the brand. Then in 1977, Sunbeam offloaded the Hurst manufacturing operation to a company called Cars and Concepts, run out of Brighton, Michigan, by a man named Dick Chrysler. The brand was now under its 3rd operator in 7 years. Linda Vaughn was still on the payroll. The asset that kept changing hands was the brand. She was the human continuity that came with it. In 1983, Dick Chrysler made the move that on paper looked like a breakthrough. He promoted Linda Vaughn to Vice President of Public Relations and Promotion. Bob Autumn at Sports Illustrated showed up to write the feature. 10 pages. From a Vamp to a Veep. Published May 23, 1983. And Linda gave Autumn a line that tells you everything about where her head was in that moment. She said, quote, "How do you think I will look in a gray pinstripe suit? Very severe. With a nice blouse that will play down my boobs, and with my hair all pulled back in a bun, and carrying a leather briefcase. I can do it, you know. It is what I have been working for." That is a woman in her early 40s who has spent 17 years as the face of a brand finally being handed an executive title. And you can hear in that quote the mix of things she is feeling. The pride, the humor, the awareness that people are going to see this a certain way. But also, and this is the part one wants you to hold on to, the genuine belief that this is the beginning of something new. That the title means something. Dick Chrysler told Autumn in that same article, "We want to bring her into more of a corporate position. Where Linda excels is in her wealth of contact. She knows everybody and is well liked and trusted by everybody, and we need Linda to help us." Read that quote carefully. He is describing what she brings. He is not describing what she gets. He is not talking about equity. He is not talking about a stake in the brand. He is talking about her value as a business asset, and he is framing it entirely from the perspective of what the company needs from her. The same article mentions the new 1983 Hurst Olds she was driving around at the time. $15,000 sticker. Autumn describes it as a drive it around and show it off perquisite of the job. A perk. Not equity. Not a bonus structure tied to performance. A company car. 17 years in, that is what the executive promotion came with. A title, a salary that was never publicly disclosed, and a company car. Now you might be thinking, look, that was just how it was done back then. Everybody worked like that. Promotional figures did not get equity. Spokespersons did not get stock. And you would be right that that was the industry norm. But here is what makes Linda Vaughn's situation different from every other promotional figure in this story. The scale and the duration. Miss Winston worked within a structured corporate program run by R.J. Reynolds, a massive publicly traded tobacco company with HR departments and defined benefits. Miss Coors was a regional promotion that rotated talent. The Hurstettes were a supporting cast. Linda Vaughn was the brand. She was not a component of the Hurst promotional program. She was the program. For 17 years and beyond, when people thought of Hurst performance, the image that came to mind was her. That is a level of brand identification that should, in any rational business accounting, come with a different kind of deal than what a rotating promotional figure get. It did not. And that gap is the whole story. There is one more piece of context that belongs in this section before we move forward, because it sets up what is about to happen at the corporate level, and it does it with a specific kind of sadness that I think matters to understanding everything that follows. On a day in mid-May of 1986, George Hurst was found dead in his car in his garage in Redlands, California. He was 59 years old. He had been separated from the company that carried his name for over a decade at that point. Whatever promises had been made to him by Sunbeam in 1970 had died with the deal that broke them. He died outside the brand he created, having been bought out and pushed aside by people who wanted the asset and not the man. There is no public record that his estate contained any provision for Linda Vaughn. By 1986, he had nothing left to give even if he had wanted to. The man who created her role, who championed her value, who understood what she was actually doing for the brand, was gone. And what remained was a series of corporate owners who understood Linda Vaughn the way they understood a piece of tooling that kept the line running. Useful. Reliable. Not an equity partner. Less than a year after George Hurst's death, the brand changed hands again. In 1987, A company called Mr. Gasket Incorporated, run out of Cleveland, bought Hurst Performance for $3.3 million. Mr. Gasket was on a serious growth run at the time. Their portfolio sales had gone from about $74 million in 1984 to $119.3 million by 1987. They were publicly traded. They were executing a roll-up of performance brands, and they wanted Hurst in the portfolio. So they paid $3.3 million for the brand and everything attached to it. Linda Vaughn's share of that $3.3 million is not a matter of public record. There is no filing. There is no interview. There is no autobiography passage describing her receiving any portion of that purchase price. What is on the record is that she was rehired by Mr. Gasket as Vice President of Public Relations for the Mr. Gasket Performance Group. New employer. New salary, amount undisclosed. New title. Same fundamental arrangement she had been working under for 21 years. The brand got sold for $3.3 million. She got a job offer. This is where it gets really interesting because that pattern, the brand gets sold and she gets a job offer, is not a one-time thing. It is the entire spine of her financial history across 6 decades. And once you see it that clearly, everything else in the story lines up behind it like cars in a staging lane. Let's stay with Mr. Gasket for a moment, because there is important context here about what was happening inside the performance industry in the late 1980s and early 1990s that shaped what Linda Vaughn's working life looked like during this period. Mr. Gasket was not just buying Hurst because they liked the name. They were buying market position. They were buying catalog depth. They were buying the kind of brand loyalty that takes decades to build and cannot be manufactured from scratch. And one of the things that came with that brand loyalty was her. She was a living, breathing piece of the Hurst heritage, and the new owner understood that keeping her on the payroll was not charity. It was a business decision. You keep Linda Vaughn associated with the Hurst name, and you keep the old guard of the performance world paying attention to your product line. Here is the thing about that arrangement, though. It was entirely one-directional in terms of who held the leverage. Mr. Gasket needed her association with the brand more than they needed to compensate her at a level that reflected what that association was actually worth. And she needed the income. She had always needed the income because the income was the only thing she had ever walked away from these deals with. No stock, no royalties, no residuals. Just the salary and whatever appearance income she could generate on the side through race weekends and trade shows and personal bookings. By the time you get into the 1990s, the performance aftermarket is changing. The old muscle car era is becoming nostalgia rather than current event. The trade shows are still running, the drag strips are still packed, but the cultural moment that had made Hurst a $20 million a year company in the 1960s is now something that enthusiasts remember rather than something they are living. Linda Vaughn is still working those shows. She is still the biggest draw in the Hurst booth at SEMA. People are still lining up to get her autograph and take a photograph. But the commercial infrastructure underneath that draw is slowly shifting. And this is the part that most people who cover this story tend to skip past, because it is not as clean and dramatic as the big headline moment. But it matters enormously to understanding her financial situation by the time the pandemic arrives. The appearance economy that she had been working inside of since the mid-1970s is an economy based on access. You show up at the race, you sign autographs, you take photos, you do the booth work, and in exchange you get the appearance fee plus whatever the brand is paying you on the salary side. That works as long as 2 conditions are met. First, the appearances have to keep happening. Second, your physical capacity to do them has to hold up. For Linda Vaughn going into the 2010s, both of those conditions were starting to get complicated. She had a heart attack in 2016. She had a stent put in and she kept going, because that is what she does. But the health picture was becoming a factor in a way it had not been when she was making 172 personal appearances in a single calendar year back in 1972. And the appearance market itself was shifting, because the demographics of the hardcore performance enthusiast audience were aging along with her, and the new generation of motorsports fans was not necessarily lining up the same way for a figure whose peak cultural moment was the era of the original muscle car. None of that is a criticism. It is just an honest accounting of what the appearance economy looks like when you are an independent figure with no institutional support structure underneath you. No pension, no retirement fund built up over decades of employment, no royalty stream from intellectual property you created. Just the work and the income from the work. And when the work slows down or gets interrupted, the income slows down or gets interrupted with it. Now look, here is what most people don't realize about how the performance industry compensated its promotional figures during this whole era. The people who ran these programs were not sitting in boardrooms trying to figure out how to cheat Linda Vaughn or anyone else. They were running businesses, and the way you run a promotional program as a business is you control the asset. You own the persona. You own the photograph. You own the brand association. You pay the person a salary to show up and represent your product, and when the arrangement ends, whether because they retire or because your company gets acquired, the asset stays with the company and the person takes their paycheck history with them. That is a completely coherent business model from the brand's perspective. The problem is that it assumes the person on the other end of the deal has other income sources, other savings vehicles, some other financial foundation being built in parallel with the salary. And for someone like Linda Vaughn, who was fully committed to the work, who was making 172 appearances in a year, who was doing military tours and trade shows and race weekends and Hall of Fame events, the work was not something she did alongside building a financial foundation. The work was the foundation. And foundations built entirely on earned income, with no equity component and no residual structure, are foundations that stop paying out the moment the work stops. This is where the analogy I want you to hold on to comes in. Imagine a musician who spends 40 years recording albums for a label that owns the masters. The musician gets paid per session. They get a salary while they are under contract. They tour and they sell tickets and they make appearance income. But the masters belong to the label. When the label gets sold to a larger company for $200 million, the musician gets nothing from that sale. The musician might get a new record deal from the new owner, or they might not. But the value they created, the catalog that justified the $200 million acquisition price, none of that flows back to them. That is not a hypothetical. That is the documented history of the recorded music industry from the 1940s through the 1990s, and it is also, in structural terms, exactly what happened to Linda Vaughn inside the performance parts industry. She was the catalog. She was the asset that made the brand worth buying. And every time the brand changed hands, the asset transferred with it, and the person who had built that asset got a job offer if they were lucky. In 2007, Mr. Gasket sold the Hurst Shifter division to B&M Racing in Chatsworth, California. Terms of the sale were not publicly disclosed. In September of 2015, Holley Performance Products acquired the MSD Group, which by that point had absorbed Mr. Gasket and Hurst along with Excel and Mallory and a handful of other legacy performance names into a single portfolio. Holley today trades publicly on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker HLLY. The company reported full-year 2024 revenue of $602 million. Trailing 12 months as of the third quarter of 2025 was $598 million. The fourth quarter of 2025 alone came in at $155 million, up approximately 11% year-over-year. That is the parent company structure that now owns the Hurst name, a $600 million a year publicly traded performance company. The brand that Linda Vaughn made famous is one of the legacy nameplates sitting inside that portfolio, contributing to that revenue number, benefiting from the heritage and the authenticity that she spent 6 decades building. There is no public record that any payment, royalty, residual licensing fee, or spokesperson stipend has flowed from Holley Performance Products or from Mr. Gasket or from B&M or from any successor entity back to Linda Vaughn for her ongoing association with the Hurst brand she helped create. The brand generates revenue. The brand is worth real money inside a publicly traded company with institutional shareholders and quarterly earnings calls. And the person most responsible for what that brand means to its core customer is selling her cars to pay her bills. Now, I want to be careful here, because it would be easy at this point in the story to frame this as a simple case of corporate exploitation. And that framing would be emotionally satisfying but intellectually incomplete. Nobody at Hurst or Sunbeam or Cars and Concepts or Mr. Gasket or Holley ever stole from Linda Vaughn. The contracts were the contracts. They were the same kind of contracts every promotional figure in that industry signed during that era. Miss Winston, Miss Coors, Miss Pure Firebird, the Hurstettes, the Goodyear Girls, salaried employees of brands. None of them, in any source we could locate, ever negotiated equity. None of them ever owned a piece of the persona they created. None of them ever walked away from a corporate sale with any portion of the purchase price. That is not a coincidence. The deals were structured that way on purpose by the brands, because the value the brands were buying was the brand itself. The person was the delivery mechanism for the brand. The brand was the asset. The person was overhead. What makes Linda Vaughn's case the one that sits heaviest is the combination of duration and visibility and measurable impact. She delivered that brand for longer, more consistently, and more effectively than any promotional figure in the history of the performance aftermarket. The math at the end of it works out exactly the same as if she had worked there for 2 years. Same deal. Same outcome. No equity. No residual. No piece of the brand she spent her career building. The duration of her commitment did not change the structure of the arrangement. It just made the gap between what she built and what she received larger and more visible. And here is what gets to me about this. In almost every other area of the entertainment and sports industry, the legal and contractual frameworks around promotional figures and brand ambassadors have evolved significantly since the 1960s. Athletes negotiate image rights. Celebrities negotiate royalty structures. Influencers negotiate revenue sharing. The intellectual property landscape around persona and likeness has been redrawn multiple times since Linda Vaughn signed her first contract with Hearst Campbell. But the specific group of people who built the promotional culture of American motorsports in the 1960s and 1970s made their deals before any of those frameworks existed, and most of them never went back to renegotiate on the new terms. They kept working under the old deals, or under new deals that had the same fundamental structure as the old ones, because that was the industry norm and because walking away from the income entirely was not a realistic option when the income was the foundation. Let's slow down here and talk about the 2016 to 2020 period in specific terms, because this is where the financial picture for Linda Vaughn starts to become genuinely precarious in a documented way. In 2016, she has a heart attack. Stent goes in. She keeps going. She is in her early 70s and she is still doing SEMA, still doing race weekends, still doing the appearance circuit. She had co-written a memoir with Rob Kinnan published by Cartech Books titled America's Sweetheart, a photo and story journey through motorsports history with Linda Vaughn. It is a thorough, well-produced enthusiast book. It covers the full arc of her career with photographs and personal recollections and context from the people she worked alongside. But here is the thing about the economics of a niche automotive memoir. A book that carries an Amazon bestseller rank of around 1.8 million is not a bestseller in any commercial sense. The royalty stream from a book at that sales level is not a meaningful income source. It is a record of a career. It is important for the historical record. It is not a financial vehicle. So by 2016, what does the income picture actually look like? You have a salary history from Hurst and then from Mr. Gasket and subsequent owners, amounts never publicly disclosed. You have decades of appearance income from race weekends and trade shows and personal bookings. You have whatever Social Security income she was eligible for based on that work history. You have no pension from any of the brands that employed her, because none of them set one up and she did not negotiate one into any of her contract. You have no royalty income from the Miss Hurst Golden Shifter persona, because she does not own it. You have no residual income from any of the brand sales that transferred her professional legacy to new corporate owners. You have a book. You have plaques and trophies and Hall of Fame certificates. And then, in 2020, two things happen that complete the picture. Her health deteriorates in a specific and serious way. She has a fall that breaks her shoulder and gives her a concussion. She is off her feet for about 6 months recovering. She has cumulative complications from the 2016 heart attack, and the fall and the recovery. By her own count, later given to Autoweek journalist Jerry Bonkowski in March of 2022, she has 14 stents and 6 screws in her shoulders. She told Bonkowski in her own words, quote, "I may have 14 stents, my shoulders are working with 6 screws in them, and I am not dancing in the street like I used to be able to do, but I can still throw the clutch and shift gears." That is a line that sounds like a punchline, and she delivers it like one, because that is how she handles everything. With humor and toughness and forward motion. But underneath the punchline is the reality of a woman in her late 70s dealing with serious ongoing health complications while simultaneously managing a financial situation that has no cushion in it. Because the second thing that happens in 2020 is the pandemic. Every race gets canceled. Every trade show gets canceled. Every Hall of Fame banquet gets canceled. Every personal appearance booking, every autograph signing, every corporate hospitality event, everything that had been generating appearance income across 5 decades of career evaporates inside about 6 weeks in the spring of 2020. And she has no other income stream to replace it with. No pension check coming in. No quarterly royalty statement from Holly Performance. No residual from the brand sales. The work was the income. The pandemic ended the work. The income ended with it. She told Bonkowski it was heartbreaking because, in her own words, we had to cancel all our plans, all our show dates and races, not being able to be with the fans and my friends and my loved ones, all because of COVID. Read that statement carefully. She is talking about missing the connection, missing the people, missing the experience. But she is also describing, without naming it directly, the evaporation of her income stream. The show dates and race appearances were not just personal fulfillment. They were the financial mechanism that kept her life running. So in 2020 and into 2021, Linda Vaughn does the only thing she has left to do. She starts selling cars. And the car she sells that matters most to this story is the white and gold 1979 Hurst Oldsmobile that she had owned for 40 years. She told Bonkowski about it directly. In her own words, "My word, I had to sell some of my cars, but the show must go on. I sold my 1979 Hurst Olds to Mr. Bruce Smith, who is a collector, and they put it on display in the main showroom of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America." That sentence, that specific sentence, I want you to feel the weight of it, because it contains in compressed form the entire economic history we have been tracing for the last 3,000 words. The car that carries the name of the brand she made famous, sold to a collector during a pandemic, because she needed the money, now displayed in the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in the building where her portrait hangs and where a plaque identifies her as the only promotional figure ever inducted in the institution's history. The car got into the building because somebody bought it. She got into the building because she earned it. Same building. 2 completely different paths in. This is the part of the story where most coverage stops. You get the heartwarming angle about the car ending up in the Hall of Fame next to her portrait. You get the quote about still being able to throw the clutch with 6 screws in her shoulders. You get the sense that everything worked out in a kind of poetic way, that the industry found a fitting way to honor its most iconic figure. And look, There is something genuinely moving about the car and the woman ending up in the same building. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But here is what most people don't realize about how the industry honors its legends. There are two kinds of recognition this sport gives out. The kind that comes with a check and the kind that comes with a plaque. And across Linda Vaughn's 6-decade relationship with motorsports, the recognition she has received has been overwhelmingly weighted toward the plaque column. Let me give you the specific record because the list is extraordinary. SEMA Person of the Year in 1979. SEMA Hall of Fame in 1985. International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction. Founders Award from the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 2000. Bob Russo Heritage Award from the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 2004. Motorsports Hall of Fame of America induction in 2019, with Don Prudhomme himself walking her in. National Linda Vaughn Day proclaimed by the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America on September 19, 2022. West Coast Stock Car Hall of Fame. Lady of the Century designation. That list goes on. The industry has given Linda Vaughn every form of institutional recognition it knows how to give. They have named days after her. They have put her in every hall they operate. They have brought out the biggest names in the sport to stand next to her at induction ceremonies. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about the 2012 quarter-mile foundation roast at the Lucas family estate in Carmel, Indiana? Because that event is often cited as the moment the industry really showed up for Linda Vaughn in a meaningful way. And it was a significant event. John Force was there. Don Garlitz was there. Joe Amato, Chip Ganassi, Bob Glidden, Doc Watson, all showed up to roast her. The foundation chairman Tracy Ruthka said publicly that the funds generated would be a tremendous help to Linda personally. And that statement from Ruthka is important, because it is one of the rare moments when someone in the industry said out loud, in public, that the money raised at this event was going to help her. Not honor her. Help her. Personally. That is a charity event. That is the industry recognizing, in the most practical possible terms, that the person who spent decades as the most recognizable face of the performance aftermarket needed financial help. And the mechanism they used to provide that help was a roast and fundraiser. Which is a gracious thing to do. Which reflects genuine affection and respect for who she is and what she has given to the sport. And which is also, when you look at it clearly, a way of addressing a structural problem with a one-time event. The roast happens once. The underlying financial structure that created the need for it does not change. The year after the roast, she still does not own a piece of the Hurst brand. The year after that, same situation. The roast puts some money in her pocket in 2012. It does not fix the architecture of the deals she signed in 1966. Here is the thing about the contrast between the recognition and the financial reality. The industry is genuinely proud of Linda Vaughn. These are not cynical gestures. Don Prudhomme walking her into the Hall of Fame is not a performance. The people who have spent their careers in this sport love Linda Vaughn, and they want to honor what she has done. The problem is that the system by which they honor her is built entirely on the assumption that honor is the appropriate currency for what she contributed. And honor does not pay medical bills. Honor does not replace the income stream that evaporated when the pandemic canceled every race and trade show in the country for the better part of 2 years. Honor sits behind glass in Daytona Beach with a plaque under it. Let's talk about what the alternative could have looked like, because I think it is worth spending a moment on this before we get to where she is now. The recorded music industry, which had the exact same structure as the promotional figure economy in American motorsports, the labels owned the masters, the artists got paid for sessions and tours, spent about 30 years watching the artists who built their catalogs age into financial precarity before the industry started creating structured mechanisms to address it. The Recording Academy established musicaires specifically to provide emergency financial assistance and resources to music people in times of need. Established in 1989. By 2023, MusiCares had distributed over $100 million in direct assistance to people in the music industry facing health crises, financial emergencies, and addiction issues. Now, the motorsports industry is not the recording industry. The scale is different, the structure is different, and the specific organizations are different. But the underlying problem is identical. You have a generation of people who built enormous commercial value for brands and institutions that are now worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and those people are aging into circumstances that reflect the deals they signed in an era before any of the modern frameworks for intellectual property compensation existed. The Motorsports Hall of Fame honors them. The industry roasts them. And when things get genuinely difficult, somebody organizes a fundraiser. The performance aftermarket generated, according to the Specialty Equipment Market Association's own research, approximately $51 billion in total market size in 2023. $51 billion. The brands that carry the legacy names of the 1960s muscle car era, the names that Linda Vaughn and the generation of promotional figures like her made synonymous with American performance culture, those brands are real revenue contributors inside that $51 billion market. Holley reports $600 million a year in revenue, and the Hurst name is part of what makes the Holley portfolio worth what it is worth. The gap between that number and what Linda Vaughn has in retirement income is not a gap created by malice. It is a gap created by contract structures that were set up 60 years ago to serve the needs of the brands, not the needs of the people who made the brands worth owning. In December of 2025, Part Raid booked Linda Vaughn for Race Industry Week. She gave them a full interview. She said, in her own words, "Anything I can ever do for this sport, just let me know. I love racing. I love this industry, and I am not done yet." She said she wants to go to every drag race she can in the coming year. She said she wants to see Leah and Tony and Alexis and everybody. She said she wants to see those grandstands full. She is in her early 80s. She has 14 stents and 6 screws in her shoulders. She is still booking appearances. She is still showing up. Because the work is what she has always had. And the work is what she still has. Here is where everything we have covered lands in a single clear place, because I want to make sure this story does not just dissolve into sentiment at the end. The facts are the facts. Let me lay them out one final time in sequence so they sit in proper relation to each other. Linda Vaughn signed a salaried spokesperson contract with Hurst Campbell Incorporated in 1966. Under that contract and under the succession of contracts with Sunbeam and Cars and Concepts and Mr. Gasket that followed it, she was paid as an employee. She held no stock, no options, no profit sharing, no royalty arrangement, no ownership stake in the persona she created and maintained for 6 decades. The Miss Hurst Golden Shifter brand association was company property under work-for-hire doctrine. Her specific compensation across all of those arrangements has never been disclosed in any public source, which is itself a significant data point about how the industry valued transparency around what it paid its most visible contributors. Hurst Campbell went public in 1968. Sunbeam acquired the company in 1970 and pushed George Hurst, the founder, out of the business he built within 3 years. Cars and Concepts acquired Hurst from Sunbeam in 1977. Mr. Gasket Incorporated acquired Hurst Performance in 1987 for $3.3 million. B&M Racing acquired the Hurst Shifter division from Mr. Gasket in 2007. Holley Performance Products, which trades today on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker HLLY with annual revenues of approximately $600 million, is the current corporate owner of the Hurst name. In not one of those transactions is there any public record of Linda Vaughn receiving any portion of the purchase price, any buyout payment, any structured residual, or any ongoing royalty tied to her decades of brand building. In 2016, she had a heart attack. In 2020, she had a fall that broke her shoulder and gave her a concussion. The pandemic canceled the appearance economy that had been her primary income mechanism for decades. She sold the 1979 Hurst Oldsmobile she had owned for 40 years to a collector named Bruce Smith. That car now sits in the main display room of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in Daytona Beach behind glass with a plaque bearing her name. Her portrait hangs in the same building with a plaque identifying her as the only promotional figure ever inducted in the institution's history. Both she and the car are in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. She earned her place. The car was purchased. In March of 2022, she told AutoWeek reporter Jerry Bonkowski that she had 14 stents and 6 screws in her shoulders, and that she was not dancing in the street like she used to but could still throw the clutch and shift gears. In December of 2025, she told Part Raid that she was not done yet and wanted to go to every drag race she could. That is the factual record. And here is what that record tells us when you read it whole rather than in the fragmented pieces the industry has always preferred to tell it in. The performance aftermarket built its brand culture in the 1960s on the backs of a specific group of people, mostly women, who were contracted as salaried employees to be the human face of the product. Those contracts were designed to serve the needs of the companies, which is to say they were designed to ensure that the brand stayed with the brand and the person was compensable but not irreplaceable in the financial architecture of the business. The people who signed those contracts were often extraordinarily good at the job, generating commercial value that dwarfed their compensation. The industry rewarded that value with recognition rather than equity, with titles rather than ownership, with plaques rather than residuals. Linda Vaughn is the most extreme example of that pattern because she is the person who held the role the longest, delivered it most effectively, and is still alive and visible and present in the industry in a way that makes the outcome impossible to ignore. She is not a historical footnote. She is at Race Industry Week in December of 2025. She is planning her race weekend schedule for the coming year. And the car she sold during the pandemic is behind glass 20 feet from her portrait in a building they named a day after her. Now, the question I always get to at the end of these videos is the one that actually matters going forward, and it is not a comfortable question. What does the industry owe the generation of people who built its brand culture before the modern frameworks for compensation existed? Not legally. The legal answer is clear. The contracts were valid. The statute of limitations has passed on any claim that could theoretically have been made under the old arrangements. Legally, nothing is owed. But commercially, culturally, the question is different. Because the brands that Linda Vaughn made famous are still generating revenue. The heritage she built is still being sold. Every time Holly runs a marketing campaign built around the legacy of the original Hurst Olds program, they are spending her history as a commercial asset. Every time the Motorsports Hall of Fame uses her induction story to drive attendance and membership, they are spending her legacy as an institutional asset. The asset keeps generating value. The person who created it is selling cars to pay her bills. The recorded music industry eventually created MusiCares because enough people inside the system recognized that the artists who built the catalog that made the industry worth billions of dollars deserved something more than a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award when things got hard. The motorsports performance aftermarket has not built that mechanism yet. The closest thing it has is the quarter-mile foundation roast model, which is an admirable gesture that depends on specific individuals caring enough to organize a specific event at a specific moment. It is not a system. It is a response to a crisis after the crisis has already arrived. Here is what most people don't realize about where we actually are in this story right now. Linda Vaughn is not a tragic figure. She would object strenuously to being framed that way, and she would be right to object. She is a woman in her early 80s with 14 stents and 6 screws in her shoulders who is booking appearances, planning race weekends, and telling interviewers she is not done yet. She has received more institutional recognition from the motorsports industry than almost any figure in its history. She has the deep, genuine affection of everyone who has ever worked alongside her, from Don Prudhomme to John Force to the crew members who have watched her walk into a track for 60 years and light the whole place up. She has a life that was built around doing exactly what she loved in front of the largest possible audience. What she does not have is what the contracts she signed 60 years ago made structurally impossible for her to have. She does not have a financial foundation that reflects the commercial value of what she built. She does not have a residual income from the brand she spent her career making worth owning. She does not have a pension from the companies that employed her across 6 decades and 4 ownership changes. She has the work. She has always had the work. And she will keep doing the work for as long as she physically can, because the work is the identity and the identity is the income, and that is the deal she signed in 1966. Walk through the front doors of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in Daytona Beach and find the main display room. Somewhere in there, behind glass, is a white and gold 1979 Hurst Oldsmobile. The plaque tells you what it is. The plaque tells you whose car it used to be. There is a portrait in the same building of the woman who used to own it. The plaque under the portrait tells you she is the only promotional figure in the institution's history to be inducted there. What the plaques do not tell you, because plaques do not work that way, is what we just spent this video working through together. The car is there because she sold it. She is there because she earned it. The brand that connects both of them is worth $600 million a year to the company that now owns it. And somewhere in Southern California, in her early 80s with 6 screws in her shoulders, Linda Vaughn is looking at her schedule for the next race weekend, because the show must go on. The show has always gone on. It is just that for 60 years the show made somebody else rich, and Linda Vaughn got the plaque.